Welcome to Intersect, where church meets culture. My name is Josh Desch, and I'm the lead pastor at Northeast Presbyterian Church, and I am joined, as always, by my wife, the fastidious Betsy.
Hey everybody.
Hey, Bets, great to have you back.
Thank you.
As always, great to be back, isn't it?
It is. It really is.
Hey, we do want to remind all of our listeners, both audio and visual, those of you on YouTube and on podcast apps, do want to let everybody know that Intersect Podcast is a ministry of Northeast Presbyterian Church. And if you are looking for a church, if you don't have a church, you can find us online at live.nepres.com. And we would love for you to join us if you're looking for a place to worship God on Sunday mornings.
Absolutely.
All right, Bets. The summer has come and it has gone.
It has. It was a great summer.
It was a great summer, wasn't it?
Really enjoyed it. Yep.
The Northeast Presbyterian Church, our church, was so gracious. I was on sabbatical, so we'll have to be talking about that in some future episodes. But first of all, I do want to tell you, I love your sweatshirt.
Oh, thanks. Northeast Presbyterian, I'm repping.
You're repping?
So my goal for this season is to wear a different piece of NEPC merch every episode. So we'll see if I can do it.
Do we have that much merch?
We actually have quite a bit.
Wow.
So I think I'm going to be able to do it.
Okay.
Yeah. Stay tuned.
All right. Well, that's part of being in a church these days, right?
That's right.
Got to have some merch. Got to rep.
Got to have some merch.
All right, Bets. Well, we are excited about the topic for today because we're both big readers, you and I both. We read all the time. Mm-hmm. And it is time for a summer reading roundup.
Yes. Reading roundup. Almost reading Rainbow.
Oh, my gosh.
But not quite.
Do you think we could get LeVar Burton?
I don't think so.
He's still doing stuff.
He is. Yeah.
We'll never forget LeVar Burton. He is a part of my childhood. Is he a part of your childhood?
Yes, definitely. He's got a great voice.
He does.
Mm-hmm.
All right, Bets. What did you read this summer? How did it impact you? We're going to share 3 books each. What you got?
You want me to kick us off?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So the first book I'm going to kick us off with is a little bit quirky. We actually read quite a bit of this with our kids, which was interesting. And I will explain more because the title is going to be a little bit off-putting. It's this great book called Over the Edge, Death in Grand Canyon. This is a good one to kick us off with.
I think you need to explain.
Gripping accounts of all known fatal mishaps in the most famous of the world's 7 natural wonders. So this is by Michael Ghiglieri and Thomas Myers.
Okay.
This came out in 2001, but I understand that they published an updated edition in 2012. So I think it's fair to say that you and I are fascinated by the adventure genre of
100%.
Books, podcasts, movies. We love watching people do crazy stuff.
Yep. So 2 big-time examples. One would be the book Into Thin Air, which was the Mount Everest expedition that
John
went wrong.
Krakauer.
That book blew up. And then a documentary would be Free Solo,
right?
Alex Honnold's Free Solo Ascent of El Capitan in Yosemite. Yeah.
Yes.
So we love that stuff.
Yes, we do. We love it. And so, I think I've always found the Grand Canyon fascinating, but as we, you and I were blessed to be able to go to Yosemite this summer and experience that. And so I can't really remember how I had heard about this book, but I randomly stumbled across it at the library. And I was like, oh, that's that book that I was so interested about. So the Grand Canyon, it's actually our most dangerous national park.
Wouldn't have necessarily thought that.
Yes, it ranks first for most reported deaths back to 2007.
Okay.
And as of in this year, 2024, there have already been 13 deaths in the Grand Canyon.
Really?
Yes.
Now, Betsy, is this all just people falling over the side?
Well, so the book examines people who have had unfortunate accidents by falling, or they developed heat stroke. Maybe they were caught in a flash flood. Their boat on the Colorado had an accident, all kinds of different things, maybe struck by lightning. So, you could be like, well, that's a pretty morbid book. And it is, and it's sad. But the reason that it was written, Tom Myers is a doctor who has worked at the Grand Canyon, one of the clinics on the South Rim for years and years. And the reason for writing this book is to warn of dangers that people may encounter. And so if you think about it, yes, it's in the Grand Canyon, but it's also hiking just more broadly. And you and I both really enjoy hiking.
Yeah,
and
we've learned a lot.
We have learned a lot. And so, in the summer, temperatures in the bottom of the Grand Canyon in July, the average is 106.
Yep.
And that's the average. So if you think about it, It's extremely hot. A lot of people go unprepared. And, you know, you and I could have been a statistic in this book. We applied for a permit a couple years ago. In God's providence, it was denied, and maybe that's just so we didn't become a statistic.
Maybe so.
So
I do want to say to our audience, most of the people who lost their life tragically made very foolish decisions.
yes.
And the book is also filled with tons of people who survived
Right.
despite making really foolish decisions. So we don't want to present the idea that you know, you're likely to lose your life in the Grand Canyon.
That's right.
If you go there. So many of the people who die, they do this crazy stuff like they're going to hike down to the canyon and back in the same day.
Right.
Things
and
like
they're
that.
they only have a couple bottles of
Yeah,
water.
yeah. So a lot of it is,
underprepared.
if you are well prepared, you know, you have a 99.999 chance
That's
of,
right.
of surviving. But it is, people have attempted, surprise, surprise, human nature, some pretty crazy stuff.
Right. So I think it's just a book about knowing your limits as you go and adventure in the outdoor world, and especially in an environment as extreme as the Grand Canyon. So if that is something that interests you, Over the Edge, Death in Grand Canyon, I Googled this. There are actually books about mishaps and misadventures in a lot of national parks.
Yes.
So this is a genre. I find it fascinating and as you said, educational.
Yeah,
So-
and Bets, if I could just share one story with our audience. So one of the little accounts in there is a guy who goes down into the canyon. He's not adequately prepared. He doesn't have enough water. And maybe it's dehydration, it's heat stroke, but he panics and he gets lost. He's off the trail and he wants to get found. So he lights his book bag on fire.
Yes,
And
he
he
did.
burns his book bag, hoping that rescuers would see the smoke. And then when
But
that
then
doesn't,
you've burned your supplies.
yep, that
so-
didn't make a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Then he stripped down to his underwear and burned all of his clothes.
Right.
And in the hope of getting found.
I think
And
he was rescued.
He was.
Yes.
Oh no, he was absolutely rescued.
So hey, maybe it worked
So
for
look,
him in the
if
end.
you can do all that and still get rescued out of the Grand Canyon,
That's right.
maybe there's hope for all of us.
That's right.
But
So
it-
very interesting.
yes.
I think anyone who's interested in doing things outdoors would really enjoy that book.
I agree.
Yeah.
I agree. Well, thanks for that great recommendation. The first book that I want to highlight for our audience is this book that I read this summer on my sabbatical, The Return of the Prodigal Son, by a well-known Catholic author named Henri Nouwen. Many people know his works. And Henri Nouwen was a Catholic priest, but his writings have really spread so much beyond Catholicism. Now, I don't agree with everything that Henri Nouwen says. I'm not a Catholic, but he really has, God gave him an incredible mind, an incredible insight. And so let me tell you a little bit about this book. This painting that's on the front cover, Betsy, this is a painting by Rembrandt. Rembrandt made a painting in 1669 that was titled The Return of the Prodigal Son. And let me just say this. It is a renowned work described by art historian Kenneth Clark as a picture which those who have seen the original in Leningrad, so the original's in Russia, and I don't think
Wow.
it's called Leningrad anymore, may be forgiven for claiming it as the greatest picture ever painted.
Wow.
So Rembrandt, this incredible Dutch painter, so many of us know who he is, this is one of his most famous works. So here's the story behind the book. Henri Nouwen goes and sees this painting, and he becomes so fascinated with the painting that he goes back. He starts studying the story of the prodigal son in a way that he never had before. And he writes this pretty amazing book about the story of the prodigal son. And what Henri Nouwen does that makes this book so special is he looks at the story from three different perspectives. He looks at it from the perspective of the prodigal son, which I think that's probably the most natural. But then he looks at it from the perspective of the older brother. And finally, he looks at it from the perspective of the father. From all three of those things. And I have a bunch of quotes I could share, but let me just share a couple with our audience.
Sure.
Nouwen writes this. He says, more than any other story in the gospel, the parable of the prodigal son expresses the boundlessness of God's compassionate love. And when I place myself in that story under the light of that divine love, it becomes painfully clear that leaving home is much closer to my spiritual experience than I might have thought. So one thing is just this metaphor of all of us have left home and we all need to come home to God. And then I'll share one more quote, Bets, where Nouwen writes this: as a self-rejecting person, always in search of affirmation and affection. Let me find my place. I find it impossible to love consistently without asking for something in return, right? So many of us, when we love another person, we really are looking for something back. I find it impossible to love consistently without asking for something in return, but the discipline is precisely to give up wanting to accomplish this myself as a heroic feat. So Nouwen says, my temptation is to try to love just by white-knuckling it and just by my good works. But then he says, to claim for myself spiritual fatherhood and the authority of compassion that belongs to it, I have to let the rebellious younger son and the resentful elder son step up on the platform to receive the unconditional, forgiving love that the Father offers me, and to discover there the call to be home as my Father is home.
Wow.
So he basically says, look, all of us are both. We are both the prodigal son and we're the elder brother. And both of those, sometimes we feel more like one than the other. And sometimes our story might be more of the rebel than the legalist, but we've both been there. And actually what God is calling us by his grace is to become more like the Father.
Wow.
And little known fact, but this book was one of the main inspirations for Tim Keller when he wrote his book, Prodigal God.
Wow.
And that book completely blew up. A lot of that, if you read this book, you can see a lot of Keller's ideas having an origin in this book.
That's cool.
Probably Henri Nouwen's best known book, The Return of the Prodigal Son.
That sounds really good.
What else you got?
Good one. Well, my reading was a little bit different than yours this summer. So my next book, we're going to flash an image of this on the screen because I read it on my Kindle, so I don't have a physical copy to show. But it is called The Comfort Crisis: Embrace Discomfort to Reclaim Your Wild, Happy, Healthy Self.
Ooh, I don't want to do that.
Well, too bad. By Michael Easter. This came out in 2021. So I was recommended this book by a friend. Another friend and I are training for a marathon later this year. And my friend recommended this book as, inspiration for, get your mindset right for doing something difficult and knowing that it's worth it. So I embarked on this book with that purpose. It's very good. So this guy is a journalist. He was a former addict, went through rehab and got clean. And what he found, kind of this entire book is through the lens of a giant hunting outing to Alaska. So I think they hunted in Alaska for about a month, completely off the grid, the barest of provisions. So he was always hungry. He was usually cold. He was often wet. And he used this experience to examine how we can really, how we can connect with an important part of ourselves by challenging ourselves to do hard things, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. So I'll just read one quote from it. Most people today rarely step outside their comfort zones. We are living progressively sheltered, sterile, temperature-controlled, overfed, under-challenged, safety-netted lives.
Whoa, that was big.
Yeah, I know. That stepped on my toes, right? And it's limiting the degree to which we experience our wild and precious life, as poet Mary Oliver put it. But a radical new body of evidence shows that people are at their best, physically harder, mentally tougher, and spiritually sounder after experiencing the same discomforts our early ancestors were exposed to every day. Scientists are finding that certain discomforts protect us from physical and psychological problems like obesity, heart disease, cancers, diabetes, depression, and anxiety, and even more fundamental issues like feeling a lack of meaning and purpose. So throughout the book, he examines these different areas where we've become very comfortable. He hits the thermostat a lot, how we're always at a temperature-controlled, we're in these temperature-controlled environments, and how how machines do so much work for us. So we sit in these very comfortable chairs for a lot of the day. And he's highlighting that principle that we all know, that the right kind of stress is actually good for you, right? Too much stress is clearly bad for you. And that's been demonstrated over and over again. But the right kind of stress, like weightlifting puts that stress on your muscle, the right kind of stress moves you forward, helps you to develop and deepen your character and develop your resilience. So it's a really good book. And again, he examines it through the lens of his hunting expedition to Alaska. So, as I was reading it, I was like, well, okay, that's not realistic for most people. Most people cannot
go to Alaska,
leave their job and go to Alaska. But I will say, in the end of the book, he gave much more practical ideas for how you can introduce some of that.
Can you give some examples?
Yeah, like he said, aim to spend at least 30 minutes of your day outside every day.
Okay.
This is interesting, he was very big into the activity called rucking, which military people know about. It's carrying the heavy backpacks, right? I'm probably doing injustice to this, but it's like, have you heard the term rucksack? I'm sure.
Yeah.
Right? So it's like a backpack that's very heavy. And he talks about how that's such an easy way to get fitter, because you're just walking around, you're not doing something that may lead you to injury, but it's a good way to get fitter. So
add some stress.
So that's a good tip. Several others, but a good book if you're interested in that topic.
The Comfort Crisis?
The Comfort Crisis.
Wow. That's kind of reminding me of one of our favorite Disney Pixar movies, WALL-E.
Right. True.
Love
the people
WALL-E.
on the,
Yep.
like those floating couches. Yeah.
Yep.
They're very comfortable.
Yep. All right. The Comfort Crisis.
Comfort Crisis.
Sounds like it's a book that may be uncomfortable to read, but it's worth it.
Yeah, it is uncomfortable, but it is very thought-provoking. So.
Well, my next one is As Light as Whipped Cream. My next book that I want to share is Where the Crawdads Sing. So I don't typically read fiction unless it's Lord of the Rings or Harry Potter. But this summer, since I was on sabbatical, I said, what the heck? I've heard about this book for many, many years. We had a really good friend that read it. So it came out in 2018. Do you remember when this came out? It was a pretty big deal, right? I mean, I think everybody was talking about it.
It got a lot of blurb. Yeah.
#1 New York Times bestseller by Delia Owens, or maybe Delia Owens. But really interesting book. I thought that the protagonist, Kaya, was a fascinating character. And if you are somebody who has ever felt like an outsider in your life, if you've ever felt marginalized, like you didn't fit in, which I bet is most people, even the really popular people, if they were really honest, I think you will enjoy this book. Being someone from the South, I loved all the Southern isms. I loved all the Southern speech that she integrates throughout the book. So here's some of my favorites. Kaya at one point is described like this: she is as skinny as a tick on a flagpole, which I think is just delightful and is something I'm going to be keeping. Yeah, another time, someone said in the book, he was as mad as a mule chewing bumblebees, which sounds like a pretty angry mule.
Yeah, that's a good
And
metaphor.
then at one point, Kaya says this quote, "I don't know how to do life without grits." And all I can say to that is amen.
Yes.
Where the Crawdads Sing. It's a fun read, and it's actually really well written. It's a murder mystery. I recommend it.
Good. I read it too, and I also enjoyed it.
All right, it's back to you.
All right, so this is my last book. This is called, and this book has gotten a lot of blurb, The Anxious Generation by Jonathan Haidt. He is a professor at New York University. How the Great Rewiring of Childhood is Causing an Epidemic of Mental Illness. So we see on the cover, there's a girl, she's looking at her phone, surrounded by balls, looks like, in like a ball pit.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
So this book, as I said, has gotten a lot of blurb. It just came out this year. We will probably do a full episode on this at some point this season. But I did just want to share a couple of quotes. So Jonathan Haidt was the co-author of a book that we reviewed several years ago, The Coddling of the American Mind.
And that book really blew up.
Yes,
Yeah.
that book was really good. That was probably what, 2015,
Sure,
2016,
something like that,
somewhere in
yep.
there. And that book was written more specifically about college students. This one really is about children. And there's a lot of overlap between the two books, but this one was really, really very provocative and really good. So I'm just going to read this sentence, which I think is his thesis for the whole book. My central claim in this book is that what he's been talking about, these two trends, overprotection in the real world and underprotection in the virtual world, are the major reasons why children born after 1995 became the anxious generation. So he's seeing this group of kids and teens coming up now. There's been such a spike in children being diagnosed with depression and anxiety. He's kind of trying to dig into what are the causes of that. And so by overprotection in the real world, he's saying people have become much more overprotective of their kids, like not allowing them to have certain experiences that would have been normal for kids in previous generations.
Like, hey, go ride your bike in the neighborhood.
Right,
Yep.
or walk yourself to school,
Yep.
or go to the mall with your friends. Not that there are really malls anymore, but and then under protection in the virtual world, meaning kids are given access to things at an early age in the virtual world that are too difficult for them to know how to manage. And so he comes up with really the takeaway from this book, even if you don't read it or listen to another podcast that we would do about it. Here's his 4 takeaways. No smartphones before high school, which
Woo!
I know that's stepping on
Them
our
fighting words.
yeah, that's stepping on our toes as a parent. He says you should only give basic phones before 9th grade.
Okay.
If you give your kids a phone.
Okay.
No social media before 16. Okay, he really harps on that because just tracing that a lot of the trends in depression and anxiety can be traced to social media use.
Yep.
Phone-free schools, which I love.
Yep.
That phone should not be allowed in any capacity during the school day. And far more unsupervised play and childhood independence. So he's saying that's the way that children develop their social skills, develop their confidence as adults, and become self-governing. So this is it's really good. I would highly recommend it. It was painful to read in a lot of ways because, it speaks to mistakes that some of us are already making with our kids or have made with our kids or young adults or whatever. But that's not to say that these kids can't be great. It's just kind of digging into that trend and saying what's behind what we're seeing.
Yeah.
So
You got uncomfortable.
This was
with
part
that
of
book.
my comfort crisis this summer. So
Yeah.
very, very good book. Really practical too. Like a lot of things that would be easy to implement as a family, but also gives you ideas to take to your children's schools and maybe your neighbors. So 2 thumbs up. Very good.
Okay. Awesome. Well, I've only got one book left, Bets.
Okay.
And I want to start by introducing this book by asking you this question. Have you ever noticed that the same side of the moon is always facing the Earth?
No.
Have you noticed that? It's true.
I wouldn't know if it was the other side.
You are always looking at the same side of the moon.
That's interesting.
Do
I
you
didn't know that.
scientifically why that's the case?
No idea.
It's because the moon is close enough to the Earth. And this is a pastor explaining science. So warning. But the moon is close enough to the Earth that it's tidally locked with the Earth. The tides are locked. It is not far enough away from the Earth to rotate. Obviously, it's rotating around the Earth, but it's not spinning to where we see different sides of the moon. We always see the same sides of the moon. So, Bets, I have a science side to me. I'm interested in science.
Yeah.
I'm also interested in apologetics. And this summer, I was on Forbes' website for some reason, just reading something else, and I saw a really interesting headline. And it said, the thesis of these science authors, this book that they wrote over 20 years ago, has never been refuted. And I thought, wow, that's interesting. I wonder what that book is, and I wonder what their thesis is. So here's the book. Rare Earth. Why complex life is uncommon in the universe. Rare Earth. Why complex life is uncommon in the universe. And this book was published in 2004. Yep. So it's 20 years old.
Yep.
It's 20 years old. And basically what these guys argue is this. They say that especially over the last 20 or 30 years, as science has advanced, scientists have become more and more convinced that we are going to find extraterrestrial life, right? And then you think about Star Trek and you think about Star Wars and all this stuff. And in the scientific community, in fact, even really prominent scientists, I believe Carl Sagan is one of these scientists, he said, not only can we be sure that there is complex life out there, and by complex life, he basically means animals, right? Mm-hmm. Dogs, cats, humans, whales, not diseases, amoeba, things like that. That's what the authors mean by complex life. They basically say that, look, scientists have been saying for all these decades that we're going to find complex life, that there's got to be tons and tons of other worlds filled with intelligent creatures, and it's just a matter of time before we discover alien life. Well, then these guys come in and they drop this bomb, and basically the scientific community was like, oh, wow, maybe we're completely wrong. I love the title on the back. It says, maybe we really are alone. And I just want to say this, as a Christian, someone who believes the Bible, but also loves science and loves learning more about science, I love it when science supports my faith. Mm-hmm. And in fact, I don't think there's ever a real conflict between science and my faith, but sometimes that becomes really clear. So the Bible says that, of course, the Bible never says that there's not other complex life out there, but the Bible does say that we are a special creation. We are made in God's image. And it also says that God made all of this amazing world that we live in. It's not this inconsequential thing. And you have a lot of secular scientists today that are like, oh yeah, Earth, a planet, it's got life, no big deal. There's probably millions and millions and millions of planets like that in the universe. And these guys are like, nope. In fact, science would tell us there's a really good chance we're the only one.
Wow. So are those authors believers?
Oh, I don't think so at all. There's nothing about God in this book. And I would say if it leans one way, I would say they want to be real clear that they don't have a religious agenda. So here's an example of why the planet that we live on, the third rock from the sun, is a rare planet. Okay? Bets, have you heard it said that our sun is a pretty typical star?
Sure.
Right? I think that's something that you commonly hear. Actually, that's not true. Let me just read from these guys. It is often said that the sun is a typical star, but this is entirely untrue. The mere fact that 95% of all stars are less massive than the sun makes our planetary system quite rare. So, what happens when you get a star that's less massive than the sun? You get less heat to warm a planet to make life possible. So what would you need if our sun was smaller? What would the Earth need to be? It would need to be closer to the sun. But guess what? If it was closer to the sun, the same impact that the moon experiences to Earth would happen to our planet. We would be tidally locked with the sun, which most scientists think would make complex life impossible. So just listen to this. The most common stars in our galaxy are classified as M stars. They have only 10% of the mass of the sun. Such stars are far less luminous than our sun, and any planets orbiting them would have to be very close to stay warm enough to allow the existence of liquid water on the surface. So you got to have liquid water for life. However, there is a danger in orbiting too close to any celestial body. As planets get closer to a star, or moons to a planet, the gravitational tidal effects from the star induce synchronous rotation, wherein the planet spins on its axis only once each time it orbits the star. Thus, the same side of the planet always faces the star.
Wow.
Such tidal locking keeps one side of the moon facing Earth at all times. So basically, if Earth's a little bit smaller, we're not around. Doesn't work. Now, you say, well, what if the sun was bigger? Okay? Well, listen to how stars that are bigger than our sun, more massive stars, are hotter and radiate substantially more ultraviolet light than the sun. Ultraviolet UV light breaks the bonds of most biological molecules and life must be shielded from it to survive. UV also can be disastrous for the atmospheres of Earth-like planets. So basically, if the sun's bigger than it is, all life gets destroyed by UV rays. If the sun was smaller, the Earth would have to be closer. That's not going to work. You're not going to get liquid water. We're going to be tidally locked.
That's fascinating.
And literally, he goes through and shows dozens of different ways that the Earth is perfectly suited for life like us. It's almost like somebody designed it, Bets.
Yeah, almost.
It's almost like that. It kind of makes you wonder. And these guys say that if you look out on the universe, even with the insane amounts of stars that we're aware of, the likelihood that there is complex life in the universe outside of planet Earth is actually, I hate to say this to all the Star Trek fans, it's actually probably pretty small. Now, it's not impossible, and God could have done all kinds of crazy things that we don't know about. But don't let anyone ever tell you that the Earth and human life and animal life is just some cosmic accident that was very easy for the universe to accomplish, because we actually have no evidence that it was easy. And in fact, the evidence that we have is that so many things were perfectly made for life to exist on Earth. Isn't that cool?
That's very cool. It
Yep.
sounds like a really good book.
It is a really good book. All right, science tangent over.
That's a good one.
Well, Bets, this was a great summer reading roundup. Do you have anything else for our audience?
I don't think so. I mean, I hope that maybe one of these books has inspired you to dig in and get some new reading material. I always love a good book recommendation.
Yes.
That's one of my favorite
Yes,
things.
me
Yeah.
too. Me
Yep.
too. Please subscribe, follow us on our YouTube channel. Of course, we love that we now have the studio, so we get to be live with our audience in person, not just audio, but we have that
Right.
option as well.
Yes.
All right, thanks for joining us. See you next time.